Hi guys, let's take a couple quick minutes to talk about rhythm reading. Your assignments this week will have some rhythms written out, and your job will be to write in the beat counts for each of the notes or rests that you see. So let's do a really quick review over our over our time signatures and how many beats different types of notes get before we dive into it. In front of you, you see 3 different time signatures. These are 2 numbers stacked on top of each other. The top number tells you how many beats are in each measure. So we have 4 beats in the first one, 3 beats in the second one, 2 beats in the last one. And the bottom number tells you what type of note gets 1 beat. So right now when you see a 4, think of that 4 as being a quarter note, because a quarter note, there's 4 quarters in a dollar, 4 quarter notes in a 4/4 measure of music. So the 4 means a quarter note. The top number tells you how many beats in a measure. And these time signatures, for the record, are not read 4/4 or 3/4 or 2/4, but it's read 4/4, 3/4, or 2/4. Let's do some quick review over our different types of notes and how many beats they get. This first one is a whole note, just an open note head with no stem, just an open note. That is called a whole note, and our whole note gets 4 beats. The next one down is our half note, an open note head with a stem. We're adding that stem. That's this part right over here. This is your stem. That is a half note. It gets 2 beats. So right now we're figuring out that a whole note is 4, a half note is 2. Next up, we have a quarter note, which is a colored in note with a stem. It gets 1 beat. And then we have our eighth note below that. Our eighth note has the addition of what's called a flag. The flag shows us that it's an eighth note. If we have 2 eighth notes together, that flag becomes a beam. So it connects the 2 notes together instead of being a flag off to the side. Our eighth note gets a half beat. And then the special note you see down below is something called a dotted quarter note. You can see here that there is a little dot after a quarter note. So the quarter note you can see looks just like this guy up here, but it's got a dot after it. In this case, that dot gives it an extra half beat. It's kind of like adding an eighth note to your quarter note. So it now gets 1.5. All right. Let's also talk about the different rest types we may see as well. You may see these, you may not see them, but we need to know how to write them and how to count them. This first one is a whole rest. You see that this black bar hangs below the line. Just like a whole note gets 4 beats of sound, a whole rest gets 4 beats of silence. Same thing for a half rest. You can see that it hangs up, it sits on top of the line, so it's above the line. The half rest, just like the half note, gets 2 beats, but of silence instead of sound. This next one looks kind of like a little squiggle. If you see it, when you see it printed, and we will in a moment, it looks kind of like a really intricate 3 in some ways. That is actually a quarter note or quarter rest. So it's just like a quarter note. It gets 1 beat, but of silence. And this last one is an eighth rest. It looks kind of like a 7 with a note on the front of it, a 7 with a ball on the end of it, on the front end. So our eighth note gets a half beat, or eighth rest, I'm sorry. Our eighth rest gets a half beat, just like our eighth note gets a half beat. So this looks like the examples that you will see in class. This looks a lot like what you're going to be doing. You will see very similar things to this, and we're going to practice writing in these beat counts. So right now, to start out with, we have a mix of quarter notes and eighth notes in this first measure. We see from our time signature that we are in 4/4 time, so that there are going to be 4 beats in a measure. So we know that by the time we get to this measure line right here, this bar line, we are going to count to the number 4. We will have gotten to 4 beats, and we need to figure out how they are divided up. So we know that a quarter note gets 1 beat, so this is going to be our beat 1. This is beat 2, so it lands on beat 2, but it just gets 1 beat. These are 2 eighth notes put together. If you remember back above, we said that an eighth note by itself gets a half beat. So each of these are a half beat, but the first one falls on beat 3. So we are going to write 1, 2, 3, and because we have a half beat left, this becomes and. We call this the and of 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, and our last one here is 4. Let's move over here. Now, things get a little bit different when we start looking at this. We have 2 half notes in the same measure. We said a half note gets 2 beats each. So each of these notes gets 2 beats. So here's our beat 1, but where is beat 2? Beat 2 is part of this note, but we still have to show that beat 2 is happening. So we're going to write beat 2 up above, and we're going to write an arrow so that we're showing that we recognize that that note is holding through beat 2. That leaves us down here with beat 3, but beat 4 also still has to happen. So we're going to write 4 up above with an arrow showing that it's going forward. Let's move on to this next one. Now we see that we have 4 eighth notes all put together. They all have a beam. Remember we talked about this bar right here is called a beam. So we're going to remember that these are 4 eighth notes, and we're going to start with beat 1. Then we have our and. Moving on to beat 2. And notice, even though they're all beamed together, it doesn't change the way we count our beats. They're just beamed together. They're put together. And then it leaves us with beat 3. But we have to count beat 4. Where is beat 4? This is a half note, so it gets 2 beats. Beat 4, we're going to write up here with our arrow showing that it carries through. Lastly, here's our whole note that we talked about in our demonstration earlier, our review. Our whole note doesn't have a stem, and it is 4 beats. So we're going to write our 1 down below, our 2, our 3, and our 4 up above, so that we showed all 4 beats in that measure. So here is our first rhythm example, all written out with our beat counts. We're going to do another one now that also includes some rests and some dotted rhythms. So let's go down here and try writing in the rhythm for this. Let's zoom in here so we can see what we're looking at. First thing to check, time signature. Here we go, 4/4 time. So we've got 4 beats in a measure. Good. That's easy to work with. Our quarter note, beautiful, easy, beat 1. Now, here's this quarter rest I talked about earlier. Remember, I drew a crude drawing of it a little bit ago. This is our quarter rest. We said a quarter rest gets 1 beat, just like a quarter note. But when we write the counts for a rest, we do not want to write them below the note. We are not gonna write it down here. We're gonna leave that blank. Instead, we're gonna write our beat 2 up above, since there's no sound on beat 2. So we have 1, 2 up above, 3, and 4, and. Let's move over to this next measure. This first thing that you're seeing here is an 8th rest. That is our 8th rest that we talked about in our review a moment ago. Our 8th rest, since it is a rest, we are also going to write that count above the note, or above the rest. That lands on beat 1. Oops. So we're going to write beat 1 up above. But that doesn't get a whole beat. It only gets a half a beat. So we have a half a beat that's floating here. Luckily for us, our next note is an 8th note, so we're keeping them together. We have 1, our and goes down here. All right, that's the trickiest thing you're going to see here. 1, and. We're moving on now to beat 2. Here's beat 3. Beat 4 is at the top, carries through. Let's move on. Okay, this is familiar territory. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 at the top, carry it through. And then we have this big guy here at the end. We have 2 sets of 8th notes where there are 4 8th notes in each grouping. It's pretty simple. We just go through. We have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So let's zoom that out, take a look at what we just completed. Let's get rid of these guys. And there is your rhythm reading written in for both of these practice examples. Now, if a little bit of this was confusing, don't worry. We will go over it in class tomorrow. And as always, Mr. West, Mr. Olson, and I are available to help if you need any additional help. Let us know if you need anything, and have a great day.